All right, folks, we've been spending this unit looking at groups of Americans who organized, stood up, protested, demanded equal treatment in America. And we could spend the rest of the year looking at any number of groups, from students to Asian Americans. We've already looked at Native Americans. We've already looked at African Americans. We're looking at Latinos. The homosexual movement starts in the 60s and 70s, along with a lot of other movements here. It doesn't start, but really becomes very loud. So the point is, it's difficult to know how much time to spend and whether or not to talk about every single group and study for the rest of the year or choose a few highlights. What we've decided to do is choose a few highlights. So as much as it feels like we aren't giving full attention to all these different groups, it's important to know that diverse group of Americans really began to, again, organize, protest, stand up, and gain more rights in the 60s and 70s. Not that they hadn't been demanding it earlier, but they began to have some serious success in the 60s and 70s using a variety of tactics. And one of the groups that stands up is women. And that's the piece here that we want to take a look at. So the term feminist is a loaded term today. There's a lot of debate, especially if you start poking around online. There's lots of different opinions about feminism. But we're going to try to look at it in a very basic, straightforward way. So for this angle, we're looking at feminism being, or a feminist being someone who believes that men and women should be treated equally. Now, there's lots of different ways to look at that issue. It's very complex. It's very personal for a lot of people. But we want to look at a couple of these headlines that came to the fore while the Black Panther Party is growing, while Cesar Chavez is leading protests. There are women of all different types standing up and pushing for more rights. So second wave feminism is a time period, and that's the time period that we've been studying, the 1960s and the 1970s. First wave feminism was the group of women that were able to secure the right to vote for women in the United States. So say from the 1900 until the 19th Amendment passes in 1920. Second wave feminism is this new growth of feminism. Today, depending on which historian or scholar you talk about, it could be on fifth wave feminism, sixth wave feminism. The point is that feminism has continued for all time, right? And regardless of your politics, somebody like Hillary Clinton being a major party nominee for president is a step forward for women, even if her politics don't align with yours. So one of the real leaders of the second wave feminism was this woman named Gloria Steinem. And she really ultimately became an activist, but she started out as a writer. And she began to deal with a lot of discrimination because her boss would only assign her what her boss decided were quote-unquote women's articles. Now, what Gloria Steinem would say is, if you like cooking and sewing, that's great. But she would say that there are women that all like other things as well. And she wanted to be involved in politics. She wanted to be involved in human rights issues. And so the fact that men were automatically assigned that type of article, even if she was a better writer or more knowledgeable, was frustrating to her. So she kind of broke away off on her own and founded a magazine called Miss Magazine, which was pretty new in the sense of it was a magazine that was focused on women as the general audience, but it had a variety of different topics. It did not just assume that they would like cooking and sewing, which if they do is totally fine, again, according to Gloria Steinem, but that Gloria Steinem felt like women were interested in other things. And so this Miss Magazine, which is actually still around, Steinem doesn't work for it anymore, opened up. And some of the issues that she thought were important to the groups of women that she was a part of was a woman's right to have an abortion and this Equal Rights Amendment that we're going to talk about in a minute. Just real quickly to summarize, it would be important to know what Gloria Steinem's first job, right, as a writer, both for the Miss Magazine and a journalist. So Gloria Steinem got her start as a journalist. The Equal Rights Amendment. This was a change to the Constitution that was proposed, and this is the actual verbiage of it. But basically what it did was it wanted to add something to the Constitution that guaranteed equal legal rights regardless of sex. The 14th Amendment, and really all those civil rights amendments, 13, 14, 15, try to decrease discrimination based on race And so a lot of people, feminists, and again, that doesn't mean that they're female. It means it's a person, for our intents and purposes, a person who feels that men and women should be treated equally, right? So a lot of feminists, but not all, thought that this should be added to the Constitution. And Congress, the federal government, passed it, and 36 states also ratified it. So it was close to becoming part of the Constitution, but it's never become part of the Constitution. There's not a constitutional amendment that guarantees equal protection regardless of sex. There are state laws, but nothing in our national Constitution. Why didn't it pass? We're going to take a look at that, but before we do, the Title IX, which is another law that did pass, right? So it's part of a larger law. And what it did was it said any program that the government gives money for needs to have gender equity, right? Now, the most obvious example of Title IX, and there's lots of them, but the most obvious example is the fact that there are female sports in public schools. Up until the passing of Title IX, you could just say, girls don't like sports. There aren't going to be any sports offered for girls, or if they do, it'll be pretty limited. But what Title IX has said is, if you're going to have a fall sport for girls or boys, you need to have a fall sport for girls or boys. They need to be both offered. Now, that has created some tension sometimes in certain schools, certainly in colleges, when there's a conflict of different sports getting funding. But overall, we would not see the success of female athletes today without the passage of this law. So what did Title IX do, among other things? Create space for women's sports in public schools. Now, again, we said being a feminist, believing that men and women are equal, means different things to different people. Now, the link to this video will be in the YouTube notes, but Phyllis Schlafly, she was a brilliant political activist, and she disagreed with the Equal Rights Amendment. She did not want the Constitution to say that there should be no discrimination based on gender. And the things that she was afraid of was that she thought that women would be forced to work outside the home. She wanted the ability to have the husband be what's called, quote, the primary breadwinner, and the woman in a heterosexual marriage stay home and be a homemaker. Now, specifically, the Equal Rights Amendment didn't say that that couldn't happen, but she was afraid that if it says that legally everybody has to be treated equally, that wouldn't happen. Also, she was worried that if there was a draft, women would be drafted, because if everybody's equal, then everybody has an equal shot at being drafted, which is a question that even in 2018, the United States is questioning, is wondering about. And she helped support the presidential candidacy of Ronald Reagan, who was elected. And she was a vocal advocate for him and really pushed the Republican Party in a new direction. Not alone, but she was definitely a big part of it. So Phyllis Schlafly is an example of a strong, intelligent woman who wanted to slow down this push for an Equal Rights Amendment. So what you should know is why she was against the Civil Rights Amendment. Title IX, what did it do? Created space for women's sports. The Equal Rights Amendment, what did it want to do? Guarantee equal legal rights regardless of sex. And Gloria Steinem was a journalist who became a strong feminist spokesperson. So again, we went really quickly through this huge issue that's very complex and for some people very controversial, but we just want you to at least be exposed to the ideas. Feel free, if you're interested, to watch the videos about Gloria and Phyllis in the info notes. And I tried to make very clear the basic information that I want you to keep track of for this on the test.